Behind the cameras, the story begins not under the bright lights of Hollywood, but behind them, in the quiet hallways of a film studio in Los Angeles, where makeup mirrors glow and cables snake across the floor. Something genuine was unfolding between two people the world called co-stars. Keanu Reeves stood near the window of his trailer, watching the sunset paint the sky orange. His face calm, but his eyes deep with thought. That day, the director had called for a break after a long, emotional scene with Sandra Bullock. It was a simple moment on screen, a look, a pause, a gentle smile. But it carried more truth than the script itself. Outside, Sandra sat on the steps of her trailer, holding a cup of coffee. Her hair tied loosely, her eyes tired yet kind. She had been doing interviews all week, hearing the same questions. Is there something real between you and Keanu? She always smiled and said, "We're just good friends." But somewhere deep down, she knew the truth was not that simple. That evening, when the crew started packing up, Keanu walked over. "You okay?" he asked softly. "Yeah," she replied with a smile. "Just thinking about the scene?" She nodded. About how sometimes acting feels too real. He looked at her for a moment, then quietly said, "Maybe because real things can't always be acted." Those words lingered in the air. Not romantic, not dramatic, just honest. That was Keanu. Behind every quiet gesture, there was meaning. Behind every silence, there was warmth. As weeks passed, the movie became more intense. Late-night shoots, emotional dialogues, and the growing unspoken bond between them. But what the cameras captured was only part of the truth. During one scene, Sandra's character was supposed to cry. The script had no dialogue, only silence. But as the camera rolled, she broke down for real. Tears not from the scene, but from something inside her. When the director called cut, everyone clapped. Only Keanu noticed her shaking hands. He gently placed his jacket over her shoulders and said nothing. No one saw it. No one needed to. That night, Sandra sat alone in her room, watching the playback of the scene. Her tears looked beautiful on screen, but she knew they were real. In that moment, she realized that the connection they shared was not about romance or fame. It was about understanding, about how two people, shaped by loss and life, could silently support each other without words. Keanu's life had been full of quiet pain. He never spoke about it much, but everyone in Hollywood knew his story, the losses, the heartbreak, the loneliness. Yet he carried it all with grace. Sandra admired that. She once told a friend, "He's the only man I know who treats sadness with kindness." One evening, after a long shoot, they found themselves sitting by the studio's old piano. The crew had left, the lights were dim, and only the faint hum of the city echoed outside. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" Sandra asked. "Pretending?" Keanu looked puzzled. "Yeah. Being okay all the time." He smiled faintly. "I don't pretend, I just choose peace." She stared at him, quietly moved by how simply he lived his truth. In that moment, she realized why people loved him, not because he was a star, but because he was human. The next morning, a small incident changed everything. One of the crew members accidentally spilled hot coffee near Sandra's hand during makeup prep. Before anyone could react, Keanu rushed over, grabbed a tissue, and gently checked her hand. It wasn't serious, but his concern was real. Cameras weren't rolling. Yet the sincerity in his eyes was more powerful than any scripted emotion. "You always show up at the right time," she said, trying to laugh it off. He looked at her and replied softly, "That's what real friends do." And that was the moment Sandra realized. Maybe the world would never understand what was between them, but it didn't matter. It wasn't a love story. It was something deeper, a connection built on kindness, empathy, and respect. As filming neared its end, rumors started spreading. Tabloids wrote stories, fans made theories, and headlines twisted their friendship into fiction. But Keanu and Sandra ignored it all. They didn't owe the world an explanation. On the last day of shooting, the director surprised them with a playback of their best scenes together. The room went silent as the screen flickered. Laughter, tears, and that one long gaze that seemed to hold 1,000 unsaid words. When the montage ended, Sandra turned to Keanu. "This is going to stay with me forever," she said. He smiled. "Then it was worth it." She hesitated, then asked, "Was any of it real?" He looked into her eyes, and for a moment the world around them disappeared. "All of it," he said quietly, "maybe more than we realize." That night, after everyone left, Sandra walked back into the empty studio. The sets were half dismantled, the lights dimmed, but she could still feel the echo of their laughter. She sat where they had filmed their first scene together. For a moment, she closed her eyes and smiled, because behind the cameras, beyond the scripts, and past the headlines, there was truth. A truth no movie could ever capture, a truth about two souls who met, not to fall in love, but to remind each other that kindness still existed in a world obsessed with noise. And somewhere, deep in that silence, was the start of something even more powerful. The unspoken connection after the movie wrapped, the world moved on. Fans filled social media with edits, interviews, and theories. Every clip of Keanu and Sandra together became a treasure for people searching for real love in Hollywood. But behind all the noise, the two of them quietly returned to their own lives. Keanu went back to his motorcycle rides through the empty streets of Los Angeles. He liked the feeling of the wind against his face. It reminded him that peace could exist even in motion. Sandra, on the other hand, returned to her calm house surrounded by trees, where her rescue dogs ran freely in the garden. She felt tired, not from work, but from emotions that still lingered. She often caught herself smiling at random things, a song they played on set, a coffee cup that reminded her of that day he protected her hand. She didn't understand what it was. Was it affection, admiration, or simply gratitude? All she knew was that he had left an invisible warmth in her life. One evening, as she was scrolling through her phone, she saw a news headline: Keanu Reeves spotted helping crew member push broken-down car after late-night shoot. She laughed softly. "Of course he did," she whispered. Even when no one was watching, he was still the same. Weeks passed before they saw each other again. It was at a small charity event in Los Angeles, one that supported orphaned children through education. Sandra was there as a guest speaker while Keanu had quietly donated, refusing to attend the stage program when she saw him sitting at the back wearing a simple black jacket and jeans. She walked up and smiled. "You're really bad at hiding," she said jokingly. He shrugged lightly. "Just here to listen." "You could have sat in the front," she teased. He smiled. "Front seats are for important people." "You are one," she replied gently. He looked at her, his expression soft but unreadable. "Maybe to the cameras, not here. Here, the kids are the important ones." That sentence hit her heart like a quiet truth. While most people chased fame, Keanu ran from it, not out of pride but humility. After her speech, they sat together outside under the string lights. The air was cool, the city distant and blurred. She turned to him and said, "You know, you inspire people without even trying." He looked up at the stars and replied, "I don't want to inspire them. I just want to remind them that goodness still works." For a long moment, they didn't speak. It was one of those silences that didn't need to be filled. In the days that followed, they began texting occasionally, short, simple messages. No flirting, no formality. Just small exchanges about life, work, and random thoughts. Keanu: "Filming's over. Miss the quiet moments, Sandra. Me too." The silence felt safe. Keanu: "Most people run from silence, Sandra. Maybe because they fear what they might hear inside it." It wasn't romance. It wasn't friendship either. It was something between rare and undefinable. One day, Sandra sent him a photo of a tiny dog she had rescued. Keanu replied, "He looks brave." She laughed and wrote back, "He's scared of his own tail." Keanu then sent a selfie, the rare kind, with his helmet half on and a soft grin. "We all have our fears," he said. Months passed, and the buzz around their movie faded. Both moved on to new projects, but fate had a quiet plan to bring them together again. A studio decided to make a documentary on real human connections in Hollywood. When the producer reached out to Sandra and Keanu, both initially declined. They didn't want attention, but when they learned the profits would fund scholarships for underprivileged children, they agreed, only on the condition that the story wouldn't be romanticized. The first day of shooting for the documentary felt strange. It wasn't a movie, no makeup, no lights, just real people talking about real emotions. The interviewer asked Sandra, "What do you think makes Keanu Reeves so loved?" She paused, her eyes soft. "Because he doesn't try to be. He just is." When Keanu was asked the same about her, he smiled faintly and said, "Because she feels everything deeply, even when she hides it behind a joke." The interviewer laughed. "So you both understand each other?" Keanu glanced at Sandra and replied quietly, "We don't need to. We just do." The room went silent for a second. The cameraman lowered his camera slightly. It was one of those rare moments when truth filled the air so naturally that no direction was needed. After the interview, Sandra walked outside with her jacket draped around her shoulders. Keanu followed, holding 2 paper cups of tea. "Remember the first time we talked about real versus acted moments?" he said, handing her a cup. "Yeah," she smiled. "You said maybe real things can't be acted," he nodded. "I still believe that." "Me too," she whispered. "Maybe that's why people saw something in our movie, something we didn't plan. Maybe they saw kindness," he said simply. "And kindness doesn't need a script." She looked at him for a long time, and in her heart she felt something shift. Not love, but peace. Peace that came from knowing she had found someone who understood the quiet parts of her soul. A few weeks later, Sandra's mother fell ill. It was sudden, unexpected, and emotionally heavy. During one long night at the hospital, she sat in the waiting area, her phone in her hand. She didn't want to disturb anyone, but somehow she typed his name and sent a short message. "Please pray for her." He replied instantly, "I already am." No long words, no comfort speeches, just presence. And that meant more than anything. The next morning, she stepped outside the hospital for air. And there he was, sitting quietly on the bench near the entrance, holding 2 cups of coffee. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask questions. He just sat beside her. The world didn't see it. No photos, no headlines, no publicity. But in that quiet morning, under the soft hospital lights, she felt what real friendship truly was, showing up when it matters most. As dawn broke, Sandra whispered, "Thank you for being here." Keanu smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me. Then what should I do?" she asked softly. He looked at her and said, "Just keep being kind. That's enough." The hidden letter days turned into weeks after that hospital morning. Sandra's mother slowly began to recover, and life started to move again, though something inside Sandra had changed. She felt quieter, softer. It wasn't sadness. It was awareness. She had begun to notice the small things, the kindness in a stranger's smile, the warmth in a simple message, the silence that didn't feel lonely anymore. And often, in those quiet moments, her thoughts would wander to Keanu, not because she missed him, but because he had become part of that quietness she had learned to value. He wasn't always around, but his presence lingered in the air, like a soft memory that refused to fade. One evening, she found herself rewatching an old scene from their first movie together. As she watched, she noticed something she had never realized before. The way he looked at her, not as a co-star, but as if he was truly listening, even when it wasn't his line. It wasn't acting. It was real connection. She closed her laptop slowly and whispered, "You weren't just playing a part, were you?" Meanwhile, Keanu was in another city filming a new project. His days were long, his nights quiet. Between takes, he often sat alone, writing small notes in his leather journal. Not about fame, or roles or success, but about people, moments, and gratitude. One night, he wrote something that would soon become a key piece of their story. Some people don't enter your life to stay. They enter to remind you of the goodness you forgot existed. He didn't mention names. He didn't have to. But that note, folded neatly, would soon find its way to her. Not through design, but through fate. A few weeks later, Sandra received a small brown envelope in her mailbox. No sender name, no return address, just her name written in neat handwriting. Inside, there was a single piece of paper, slightly creased, with those same words written on it. Some people don't enter your life to stay. They enter to remind you of the goodness you forgot existed. She immediately knew it was him. She smiled, held the paper close, and whispered, "You're impossible, Keanu." But what touched her more was the simplicity of the gesture. No signature. No message asking for reply. Just a quiet reminder of what truly mattered. She placed the note on her nightstand, beside a photo of her mother, and for the first time in weeks, she slept peacefully. In the following months, both of them became busier than ever. Sandra was working on a new script that she had been developing, a story about human connection, inspired by her own experiences. And Keanu was deep into a demanding action film that pushed his limits physically and emotionally. But life has its strange ways of bringing certain souls back together. The film festival season arrived, and both their new projects were selected for the same international event. The organizers, unaware of their quiet bond, scheduled them for a joint panel titled Truth in Storytelling. When Sandra read the email, she laughed softly. "Of course," she said to herself. The day of the event arrived. The grand hall was filled with reporters, cameras, and hundreds of fans. Sandra stepped onto the stage, elegant and calm. A few moments later, Keanu walked in. Simple black suit, same calm smile. The applause was thunderous, but what the crowd didn't see was the small, knowing glance they exchanged before sitting down. The moderator began asking questions about acting, emotions, and the line between reality and performance. At one point, someone from the audience asked, "You both have this incredible on-screen connection. Do you think it's something you can create, or does it just happen?" Keanu thought for a moment, then said, "You can't create truth. You can only recognize it when it's there," Sandra added, "and when you do, you protect it. Not for the world to see, but for your own heart to remember." The hall went silent. No one expected such honesty. After the session, they slipped out through the back exit to avoid the flashing cameras. Outside, under the golden light of sunset, they found a quiet corner near the festival garden. "You really sent that note, didn't you?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I didn't expect it to reach you." "It did," she said, "and it came at the right time." He nodded, then looked toward the horizon. "Maybe we're all just letters in each other's stories. Then what are we in ours?" she asked gently. He paused. "Maybe reminders of what real looks like." A gust of wind passed, carrying with it the sound of laughter from the distant crowd. Sandra turned to him and said, "You know, people still think our best moments were scripted." He smiled. "Maybe that's the best part, when truth looks too beautiful to be planned." They both laughed quietly, but deep inside, they knew that something about their connection had grown beyond words or explanations. It was no longer about movies or friendship or time. It was about understanding, an understanding that didn't need labels. Later that night, Sandra received another message, this time from a journalist who had been at the event. It said, "The way you and Keanu spoke about truth moved the whole audience. People saw something real today." She stared at the message for a long time, then replied, "Because it was." Back in his hotel room, Keanu sat by the window again, his journal open. Under the soft lamplight, he wrote, "We spend our lives pretending to be strong, but maybe real strength is just showing up when someone needs quiet company." Then he closed the book, smiled faintly, and looked out at the stars. Neither of them knew it yet. But that same night, a small video clip from their panel went viral online. The internet called it the unscripted truth. People everywhere started talking about their connection again, not as gossip, but as something pure and hopeful, and for the first time. Their story became a reminder to millions that real kindness still existed in a world full of noise. The discovery, the video from the festival, didn't just go viral. It spread like light, across continents, through screens, through hearts that had forgotten what real emotion looked like. Within days, millions of people watched that quiet clip of Keanu and Sandra speaking with such honesty. No red carpet glamour, no scripted lines, just truth. Comment sections filled with words like, "This is what real humanity looks like," and "I want to believe in friendships like this again." People weren't seeing stars anymore. They were seeing two souls who made kindness feel possible. But for Keanu and Sandra, it was both beautiful and overwhelming. Neither of them had expected their quiet connection to become a global headline. That evening, Sandra sat in her home garden, surrounded by the soft glow of fairy lights. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. Friends, journalists, strangers, everyone wanted a comment. She sighed softly, holding the phone close to her chest. Then she saw a message from him, Keanu. "The world's making noise again, Sandra." "I know, and it feels louder than ever." Keanu. "Then let's stay quiet. The noise will fade." Sandra. "But this time, the noise feels kind." He didn't reply right away. After a few minutes, he simply wrote, "Then maybe we let it be." She smiled, because that was exactly what made him different. Where others ran toward attention, he walked away from it, not out of arrogance, but peace. Days later, Sandra got a call from the film festival team. They wanted to do a short behind-the-scenes follow-up, a small documentary about how truth connects people. They invited both her and Keanu to join. She hesitated. The last time they did something like that, it changed everything. But after a quiet moment of thought, she said yes. Maybe, she told herself. The world needed more of these honest stories. A week later, she arrived at the small studio where the shoot was set up. The walls were covered with photos from their previous projects, old movie stills and quotes from interviews. As she walked through the hallway, she noticed one photo that stopped her, a candid image from years ago. It was from the set of their first movie together. She was laughing, and Keanu was looking at her mid-smile. She remembered that day. The sound technician had tripped on a wire, spilling water all over the floor, and they had both started laughing uncontrollably. It wasn't part of the movie, yet someone had captured it. She touched the frame softly and whispered, "It's funny how real things never fade." Inside the studio, Keanu was already there. He looked up as she walked in and smiled. "You found the old photos?" "Yeah," she said. "They caught us off guard back then," he chuckled. "Those were the best moments, the ones no one planned." The documentary shoot was simple. No scripts, no retakes. They sat across from each other, a camera quietly recording as they spoke about life, art, and truth. At one point, the interviewer asked, "Do you ever regret being so open about your friendship? Now everyone feels they know you." Keanu answered calmly, "Being open isn't about being exposed. It's about being honest. And honesty doesn't need to be defended," Sandra added. "And sometimes honesty connects people more than perfection ever could." The room went still again. There was that familiar energy, quiet, raw, and true. After the shoot, the director approached them and said, "We found something during our archive search, an old letter that was never mailed. It was written during your first movie together. Apparently it was part of a promotional box we were restoring." Sandra looked curious. "A letter?" The director nodded and handed her a small envelope. It had her name on it, written in handwriting she instantly recognized. She froze for a moment. "This is Keanu's." He looked just as surprised. "I didn't even know that survived." She opened it slowly. Inside was a short note. The paper was yellowed slightly with age. It read, "Dear Sandra, sometimes truth happens in silence. You don't have to say anything to make it real. Thank you for being the calm in all this chaos." She looked up, eyes glistening slightly. "You never sent it." "I wrote it after the last day of our first film," he said softly. "But I didn't want to make things complicated. I figured if it was meant to be understood, you'd feel it without words." She smiled faintly. "I did, even back then. The documentary crew had stepped out to give them privacy. For a while, they just sat in that quiet room, the letter resting between them. Then she said, "You know, people always say our connection feels scripted." He nodded, "Maybe because it's too gentle for this world." And maybe that's what makes it real, she whispered. He looked at her, his voice low and sincere. You've always been the truth in the noise, Sandra. She blinked back tears. And you've always been the calm in the storm. When the documentary aired weeks later, that moment wasn't included. The producer said it was too personal. But somehow, word of the letter leaked online. The internet erupted again, headlines everywhere, the lost letter from Keanu to Sandra. But this time, it wasn't gossip. It became a symbol. People began sharing stories of their own letters, their own unspoken connections. Someone commented under a clip. They reminded us that real emotions don't need an audience, and that one sentence became the essence of everything they stood for. The next time Sandra saw Keanu, it was at a quiet coffee shop near the ocean. No fans, no cameras, just waves and wind. She handed him a small envelope of her own. He raised an eyebrow. What's this? A reply, she said softly. He opened it and read, Dear Keanu, maybe some people don't walk beside us forever, but their presence stays, like the sound of a kind word long after it's spoken. Thank you for reminding me what quiet truth feels like. He folded it carefully and said, So we're even now? She smiled. No, you still owe me a coffee for that jacket you ruined years ago. They both laughed, a sound that carried across the shore like music only they could hear. That day, as the sun set behind the waves, neither of them said goodbye. They just sat there side by side watching the sky turn gold. Because some stories don't end. They just fade into peace. The storm within for a while, everything seemed calm again. The documentary had settled into the world like a gentle echo. People stopped asking questions. The headlines faded and life returned to its normal rhythm. Keanu went back to shooting a new film overseas, while Sandra focused on her foundation for children's welfare. They still messaged each other from time to time, small, simple check-ins, but peace has a strange way of testing hearts. Sometimes it breaks not through noise, but through silence. It started with a single rumor, one that grew faster than either of them could stop. An online magazine claimed that the letter, the one Keanu had written years ago, wasn't genuine, that it had been staged as a publicity stunt for the documentary. Within hours, hundreds of outlets picked it up. The same people who once celebrated their honesty now turned it into suspicion. Sandra sat in her kitchen that morning, her phone lighting up non-stop with calls and messages. She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she watched the steam from her coffee fade slowly into the air. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Disappointment. Not in the world, but in how quickly truth could be twisted. That afternoon, Keanu called. You've seen it? He asked quietly. Yeah, she said. I thought we were past this. We'll be fine, he replied. Truth doesn't need defending, but it hurts, doesn't it? She whispered. He paused for a long moment before saying, Yeah, it does. She took a deep breath. Maybe this is why people hide their real selves, because honesty gets questioned more than lies. He stayed silent. Sometimes, silence was the only comfort he knew how to offer. Days passed. The noise grew louder. Some networks replayed clips from their interviews, twisting their words. Others claimed there was a deeper story between them that neither had revealed. Paparazzi started following them again. One night, Keanu returned to his hotel after a long day on set. As he walked through the lobby, flashes went off, cameras waiting to capture his reaction. He didn't stop, didn't speak. He just walked past quietly, his calmness more powerful than any denial. In his room, he sat by the window, the city lights reflecting on the glass. He wrote a small note in his journal. The world doubts kindness because it's not used to seeing it without conditions. He closed the book and whispered to himself, Don't let them take that away. Meanwhile, Sandra decided to stay away from the press. She went back to her old routine, long morning walks, time with her dogs, and silent evenings with her mother. But inside, she felt a heaviness she couldn't explain. One night, her assistant showed her a post. A fan defending her and Keanu with a heartfelt message. Even if the letter was staged, the emotion wasn't. You can't fake kindness in someone's eyes. That sentence brought tears to her eyes. She realized something. It wasn't about proving the truth anymore. It was about living it. A few days later, she decided to visit Keanu. No cameras, no schedule, just a quiet trip to his film location in Canada. She arrived without warning, walking through the cold evening air toward the set. When he saw her, he froze for a moment, then smiled. "You're here. Someone has to remind you to sleep," she said, trying to sound light-hearted. "You shouldn't have come all this way." "I wanted to," she replied softly. He looked at her for a moment, then said, "Thank you." They sat together near the set lights, watching the crew pack up for the night. Snow began to fall slowly, tiny white flakes glistening in the dim light. "They can say what they want," she said quietly. "I know what's real," he smiled faintly. "The truth doesn't need applause, but it deserves protection," she added. He nodded. "And you've always been good at that." For a moment, neither spoke. Then she pulled something from her pocket, a small folded paper. "What's this?" he asked. "A copy of the letter," she said. "The real one. I kept it all these years. Maybe it's time the world saw it." He shook his head gently. "No. If we show it, we become part of the noise again. So we stay silent," she asked. "Silence isn't weakness, Sandra. Sometimes it's strength." She looked at him, the snow falling softly between them, then let them talk. "We'll just keep living," he smiled. "Exactly." The next morning, while the world kept spinning its stories, they went for a walk through the forest trail near the filming site. It was quiet, peaceful, untouched by the noise of the internet. At one point, Sandra stopped and looked around. "It's beautiful here," she said. "It's honest," he replied. She smiled. "Like you." He shook his head. "I just try to be human." "And that's rare enough," she said softly. They stood there for a while, the wind whispering through the trees, snow crunching beneath their feet. Later that evening, Keanu received a letter slipped under his hotel door. There was no name, no sender. Just one line written in delicate handwriting. "Thank you for reminding the world that real still exists." He smiled, folded the note, and placed it inside his journal, right next to the first letter he had ever written to her. As weeks passed, the rumors began to fade, just as he had predicted. People moved on to new stories, new distractions, but something had changed. In the silence left behind, their connection had grown stronger, not through words, but through trust. They didn't owe the world explanations anymore. Their peace was private now, and that made it sacred. One night, as they sat on a small wooden bench overlooking the lake, Sandra whispered, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Keanu thought for a long moment. "No," he said. "Every storm teaches you what peace truly means." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe the storm was worth it." "It always is," he said. They sat there quietly, watching the reflection of the moon shimmer on the water. No cameras, no headlines, just two people who had walked through chaos and found calm again. The truth revealed months passed since the storm faded. The noise of rumors had quieted, leaving only a soft silence that both Keanu and Sandra had learned to cherish. They had returned to their lives again, calmer, wiser, and somehow closer than before. But as life often does, it had one last story to tell. One morning, Sandra received a package. It had no sender name, no label, just a small golden seal on the corner. She hesitated before opening it. Inside there was a small notebook, old, weathered, and filled with careful handwriting. The first page began with a date, 94. It was from the first year they ever worked together. Her hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. Every entry was written by Keanu, but these weren't scripts or production notes. They were reflections, small thoughts about life, the world, and people who had touched his journey. And there, halfway through the book, she found a page that stopped her heart. Day 47. She's different, not because she acts well, but because she listens with her eyes. I hope one day she knows how rare that is. Another page read, Day 89. Today she laughed during a serious scene. It broke the moment, but it fixed something in me. Maybe truth isn't always about staying in character. And then the last one, last day of shoot. I didn't tell her, but she reminded me that gentleness is stronger than fame. If I ever forget who I am, I hope I remember her calm. Sandra sat frozen for a long time, her heart beating softly in the quiet of her living room. These words were never meant for the world. They were pieces of his truth, written years before the world had even begun to wonder about their connection. And now, decades later, they had found her. She immediately called him. He answered, his familiar calm voice carrying warmth even through the phone. Hey, you okay? She didn't speak right away. She was holding back tears. Finally, she whispered, I got your journal. There was silence on the other end. Then he sighed softly. You weren't supposed to see that. Why? She asked quietly. Why hide something so beautiful? Because, he said slowly, it was never meant to be a story. It was just me trying to understand what felt real. She smiled through her tears. You did understand, Keanu. You understood before anyone else. He stayed quiet for a moment, then said softly, maybe that's why it scared me. Why? Because real things don't have endings, he said. They just stay. A few days later, they met again, at the same lake where they had sat months before. The air was crisp, the water still, and the world seemed far away. She handed him the journal. I think this belongs to you. He shook his head. Keep it. It found you for a reason. She smiled. Then maybe it's time we write something new inside it. He looked curious. Like what? Something for the both of us, she said softly. She opened to a blank page and wrote slowly. Dear Truth, thank you for finding us, even when we tried to hide. She handed him the pen. He looked at the words for a moment, then added his own line beneath hers. And thank you for proving that kindness never needs proof. They closed the book together, their hands brushing slightly, a small gesture that carried the weight of everything they had been through. Later, they sat by the edge of the lake watching the sky shift from blue to orange. Sandra said quietly, You know, all this time people have been calling our moments scripted, and maybe we let them believe it. Maybe we did, he said, but maybe that's fine, because the truth doesn't need to be shouted. Yeah, she smiled. Some truths are better whispered. He looked at her, his eyes soft. So what happens now? She thought for a long moment, then said, We keep doing what we've always done. Be kind, stay real, and disappear when it gets too loud. He laughed softly. That sounds perfect. It always was, she whispered. Months later, that same journal would be auctioned anonymously for charity. Not by them, but by someone who had found it years later after their quiet meeting. It became a mystery in Hollywood circles, titled The Journal of Truth. No one ever confirmed it was theirs, and neither Keanu nor Sandra spoke about it again. But those who read the words inside said it changed something in them. It reminded them that behind fame, behind cameras, and behind all the lights, there were still people who believed in gentle hearts and quiet respect. Years later, during a rare interview, Sandra was asked one final question. After everything that's been said, what was real between you and Keanu? She smiled softly and replied, Everything that wasn't on camera. And that one line silenced the world. In another part of the world, Keanu sat alone on his porch at dusk, reading a letter that Sandra had sent months before. It was short, just one line. Thank you for teaching me that truth doesn't need a stage. He folded the letter, looked up at the sky and whispered, Thank you for believing it. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying his words into the quiet evening, where no cameras rolled, no lights shone, and no scripts were written, just truth, real, silent, and eternal.